Hi, this is Robyn Norris Casady.
And Alison Palevsky with Creativity
Deconstructed,
a podcast where we interview entrepreneurs, artists, and disruptors.
And then cover the secrets behind how these creators turn their ingenuity into profitability.
We're here today with renowned artist Simon Haas, who makes up one half of the set of twins, the HAAS Brothers. The HAAS Brothers are known for their quirky yet incredibly detailed pieces that range from functional furniture to fine art vessels. They've never been afraid to push the limits of creativity in their work, often producing thought-provoking and evocative pieces that resonate. Collectors include everyone from billionaire businesswoman Linda Resnick, actor Leonardo DiCaprio, and most recently music goddess Rihanna, who they also did a collaboration with. This podcast focuses on creativity and explores the process of taking a creative idea and making it into a sustainable business. I want to start out by talking a little bit about your childhood. Can you talk to us a little bit about your parents, what they were like, where you grew up, and if you had any artistic tendencies early on?
Yes, for sure. I was pretty artistic from birth, I'd say, or I don't know, but as far as I can remember. And my family was kind of like a petri dish for creativity. I don't know, my mom is an opera singer. My dad was a stone carver. My older brother's an actor. And there was always music in the house. I was always encouraged to draw. I grew up in Austin, Texas, and I kind of didn't have that much to do, actually, because it was still a small town. So basically all I did was either read about or make art, and mostly drawing when I was young.
So was there a moment later on that you knew you would be an artist for your career?
I think that was my goal always. I mean, I had a moment where I thought I'd be a paleontologist. And I think that's the only other career path I saw for myself. Otherwise, it was just always artist. I'd read a David Hockney book, or I looked at the pictures, I think when I was like 8, and I decided that that's what I wanted to do.
Well, were there a lot of artists also around your life, people in more the painting or the sculpture that were making a living doing that? Did you also get to see those people growing up?
I didn't see painters making a living, but I did have access to, my mom knew so many people. Actually, my whole family brought a lot of really amazing people around. A lot of directors. There's this concert pianist named Philip Mall who was always at my house, and I would play piano for him. And I mean, it was kind of scary because he's like really good. But a lot of actors my brother was working with, and directors my mom knew. So I did see a lot of, I had a lot of examples of very successful people in the arts, but painting wasn't one of them. And that was really my goal as a kid.
Right. Because your brother started working as an actor very young.
Yeah, I think he was 8 or 9.
Okay. So that, yeah.
And all of you, all the kids seem to have some kind of artistic or musical talent. So, but your mind is also mathematical and scientific, because there's a lot of science behind your art.
Yeah.
And I think people don't know that. The first time that I came to your studio and actually saw what you did, I got a full tour, and I was so kind of overwhelmed by the process of what it is, because you see the finished object, but you don't always know what goes into creating it. So maybe you could talk about a few of your processes that involve the science of Simon.
Yeah, as far as my family goes, I'm an anomaly in that way. I think I'm like the only one who's super science obsessed. But I do have this kind of compulsive need to understand how things operate and wanting to take them apart or recreate them. I think that started actually visually with, if I do a drawing, I want to be able to understand what it takes to go from observation to putting it through your hand. And there's a type of observing there that's, I think, consistent between art and science. It's like a really focused, kind of inquisitive gaze at whatever it is. So that is something I've always been into. I think what switched me on to really thinking about science and logic in particular is a book called Metamagical Themas by Douglas Hofstadter. And I just happened across that in a used bookstore one time. And I thought the name was weird. And I was like, oh, I'm going to read that. And it completely changed my brain.
How old were you when you read that?
That I was a freshman in college. And I went to, my brother was living on St. Mark's at the time in New York. And there's a used bookstore on St. Mark's. I don't remember what it's called, but I was bored and I walked in and just looked around and saw that. And it's weird how something like that can kind of change your whole reality. I'd been interested in science, but that made me hone in on exactly what I like, which is more about logic and like why thinking happens, or how language and art and music are connected to each other.
So for the accretions that we're looking at up here on the screen, do those have a drawing that goes before them?
Yeah, but the drawing is done by my brother. So Nikki draws everything. I draw, but in a very different way. I'm like, in our studio, I am the process artist, and he's the sculptor. So the shapes are fully his, and the texture on them came out of a process that I worked on.
Okay, so that brings, there's so many things you said there, but in your studio, everybody has different roles, but let's focus for a second on you and your twin and how you develop those roles. And you just said, well, Nikki's the sculptor. And so how can you, what happens there? Like, how do you decide, how do you get to the moment where he's this and you're that? And what's that exploration process for the two of you as twins?
You know, I don't know how it came to be like that. It just sort of happened. But when we first started, I was the one who did technical drawings, like in AutoCAD and stuff. And he would have like these far out ideas for whatever it was. He has a lot of far out ideas, and he really like has so many ideas. And I do too, but I think maybe a little more measured about it. And so I think the initial phase of something happening is him kind of having a bunch of feelings and throwing out a lot of ideas. I act a little bit like an editor, but like a very supportive editor. And if there's something he's dreamt up that doesn't have a good way of being built necessarily, then I will start a new process. But I also just in my life get obsessions with certain things. Like most recently it was, why does a leaf have the same shape when it's this big that it does when it's this big? How do you make a sheet material scale like that? That's a really complex, like how do you answer that? And so that like preoccupied my head for 5 years. So I started working on processes, and what I do is I'll have obsessions like that. I work on something and then a material comes out of it, and it kind of becomes part of a toolbox that he can use to sculpt. Well,
can I actually go back a whole second? Because I was actually driving in the car. I have twins that are 10. So I was driving them to school today. And of course, they started to fight. And it was a little bit of needling and a little action, competitive things happening there. And I said, I'm actually interviewing a twin today who says that he's not competitive with his brother. And they work together and they have this great working relationship. And one of them goes, well, I don't believe that. And I was like, well, I'm going to ask them if it's true, and how, how have you worked together? How did that part start as a twin? And all of that. I'm fascinated by that.
And they're twin boys, by the way. It's worth mentioning.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone's a little different. And maybe, I think when we were kids, there was more competition. But we did realize that working together, just makes us more useful.
Like a yin and a yang, would you say that's what you are?
We're super different people. And I mean, he and I will sometimes talk about how I used to make all of the phone calls for the two of us, and he would drive, and I never drove, and he never made a phone call.
Growing up, this happened.
Yeah, to the point where when we were like 20, he had to make his first, or I mean, I'm sure he made other phone calls, but he was on his own. Because I was at school. Maybe I was 18. And he had like a panic attack because he was so nervous about calling people.
Right.
And so we did always sort of assume a role that the other one then didn't have to do. And so when we put those two things together, I think since one gets to focus on part A and the other focuses on part B, you wind up having a really complete piece at the end of it. So I think we were sort of, just the way our dynamic is, it makes sense for us to work on an object together. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think it's really so fascinating. Weird. I actually do even see that in my kids, this idea that if someone is good at this, like one is actually a really good talker to people, and then the other one never has to really do it. And the other person is, so I think it's interesting that you've now used that in actual things, like making a phone call and driving, and now with the art, like the process of it, and how you've like the manufacturing of it coming together and creating the art. That's just really interesting that you're like greater than the individual.
Oh yeah. I think that's why our stuff looks like it does. Neither of us would make it look like that otherwise.
So it's 2 points of view that are merged together into one.
Yeah. And that will happen with anyone who has to collaborate. But since we've been doing it since we were in the womb, basically, I think it's just pretty fluid.
And you don't fight now.
No, we've definitely had fights, but it's more it's more personal, and we will have disagreements occasionally on creative stuff, but we both really want to resolve it quickly, and it's never like a problem.
So wait, so you're together, you turned 17, 18 years old, and you guys both go off to school. I actually don't know this part of your educational background. Where did you go? Nikki was in New York, and then how do you come back together and end up in LA? And
so he didn't go to school. He got a modeling contract and moved to New York to be a model. We were sitting together, and a mutual friend of ours. We
chose him over you.
Well, yeah, he said, "Wow, you should really be a model," and like didn't look at me at all. And I was like, "Hello." So yeah, but it was fine. He went off to New York, and he was doing that and playing music. And I went to RISD, and so I went there to study architecture. Then I dropped out. I went back again to study painting. Meanwhile, he had been developing a music career with Vincent Gallo, which is really a bizarre story, and I won't go into the whole thing, but the two of them went on tour with Eric Erlandson from Hole as a band called RRIICCEE. That was no recordings allowed, only live shows. And I was kind of like I would help out making posters and things once in a while, but I was busy at school. Eventually they asked me to join the band. And so as a keyboardist, music was huge in our family, and my mom is very musical. My older brother is obsessed with music. It kind of was the main, it was our main
art form.
Yeah.
And exactly. What does Nicky play?
He plays everything, but he's an amazing drummer. And he plays guitar and bass and kind of can play anything. I'm really keys only. And then we would both sing. It was bizarre. I don't know if there's any recordings out there.
We need some recordings.
Yeah.
Well, they're not supposed to be out there.
Right.
And I'm okay with that because it was improvised and I was young and I would be embarrassed about it. But they asked me to join, and so I'd been kind of thinking about leaving school. I just went through a breakup that like made me want to leave school also, which is a dumb reason, but it was on my mind.
Yeah, we all have that story.
Yeah. And so when they asked me, I was like, yeah. And I went on tour, and we drove from New York to Santa Barbara on a tour, landed in LA, and then I didn't leave. So I just stayed here.
So with them, they stayed also?
Yeah, my brother ended up moving after 6 months. He went back to Austin maybe for a minute. I mean, we had moments of going back to Austin, and I stayed in Santa Fe for 6 months working on a stone carving project my dad was doing. So the two of us did kind of go back to the Southwest occasionally to work on stone.
Do you think your work has Southwest influences?
Yeah, especially Nicky's. He has that kind of Austin slacker aesthetic that is, we went back recently. We went to Amy's Ice Cream, which is a famous ice cream place there. And they have like all this stoner art and like, I don't know, Spencer's Gifts was like a big thing for us.
We know
there.
that.
Yeah. So that stuff actually enters our work a lot. Not that Spencer's is Southwest, but I think specifically Austin. Daniel Johnston had a mural that says, "Hi, how are you?" And it's this animal with these two eyes. Like, I don't know how to, I think
coming
it's
out of like
frog.
almost like horns or something. Yes.
It's like some weird frog. That image has made its way into our work a lot. So, we're very Austin, actually.
A lot of animal iconography. Would you consider that the Austin part, or is that just something you're personally interested in?
I think that, to me, is sort of historically, it's, I think people are drawn to them either way. It's like a good vessel to get ideas through. I mean, you can go to Greek mythology or earlier than that. It's just a pretty common theme. And I don't think it's, I don't think it even needs to have a reason for showing up in art. They just represent something. And so it's a good way for us to to show ideas and stuff. We do a lot of chimeras, like really freaky, weird animals that don't actually exist. And I think that's because we're both kind of obsessed with personality and how do you get an attitude or a personality across with like as little information as possible.
Wait, so who's your spirit animal? What?
Mine sounds bad. I think a snake, though. I just really like snakes. People don't like that. It doesn't mean I'm like, I'm tricky or sneaky, but I like about snakes that they move really beautifully and
they glide.
They're elegant, and they also are like on their own track. You have no idea what they're thinking about. So that's kind of more where it is for me.
That's true.
Okay, so let's go back. So then how do you land in LA and pick up your first project and become the official HAAS Brothers?
Okay, so we both moved to Echo Park into a house together. I was a regular at Elf Cafe, which is a vegetarian restaurant on Echo Park Boulevard. And I was there literally every night because I had social anxiety and I needed to like have this pattern. And I wound up making friends with them. I became a cook there, and that was like my life for many years. Was I was cooking there, and then I would draw at home. And then I met a customer one night, Roman Alonso, who I told him I could draw, and he hired me to do some drawing. And that would eventually lead to us doing the Ace Hotel lobby, all the murals in downtown Ace.
So you bring Nikki in at that point. You say, "Hey, I have this thing," and
that just came back to us later. But
sorry,
Nikki
what year is this now? The Ace Hotel was
2000. Oh, the Ace was 2013, I think. But I met him in 2008, and so I was doing that kind of stuff where I was pursuing painting and drawing on my own while working at a restaurant. And Nikki was a house manager, kind of a personal assistant, but more specific to the house. And he wound up building a lot of furniture for the house. And one of his clients said, "Hey, can you build me like my whole office?" And he asked me to join on that because I had studied architecture. And that was our first project. That's what made us do anything. And that was in 2009.
Wait, sorry, can I ask this question? Because I read a little bit about you. Was that the Toby Maguire buying the furniture? Okay.
Yeah. So we knew him because of our older brother. And he's really interested in architecture. And
art, Toby Maguire. Huge art collector.
Yeah, he's so and he's also somebody who really is very supportive of arts and seems to like helping people do whatever they want to do.
So he was mentorial, like he wanted to support you guys.
Yeah, very much. So he was a huge piece of the puzzle. But when he was building an office, he asked us for recommendations for architects, and I was obsessed with Johnston Mark Lee. And so he hired them, and we were going to be fabricators to begin with, but they sort of invited us to help out. Again, they are they're also sort of mentors. They're the most creatively generous people I've ever met to allow like completely unknown young people into their process.
Well, they're pretty young as well.
Yeah, but like we were children, you know,
Right.
so we hadn't ever done anything. So that was amazing. And we wound up working with them. At one point they asked us to fix a Geoponte bed for them. I may have told you this story.
I want to hear it. Robyn's never heard it.
Yeah.
So, and I love Geoponte, and it's his stuff is hard to come by. It's really special stuff. But they had a bed that needed like a slat replaced, and they asked us to fix it, which is a really easy fix. And we did that. We had a really bad truck, a really terrible car, and we loaded it into our car. We're taking it to them on the west side on the 10, and the bed just flew out the back of our car.
Oh my! I knew there was gonna be a bad ending.
So, I was so
like,
I've never been so panicked in my life. This was our first.
So just shattered on the freeway, a Geoponte bed.
Yeah. Completely shattered, and it got like completely run over also. So it was really it could never be fixed after that.
So then you called and explained that one.
Yeah, I was on the side of the freeway and I was like, Sharon, I don't know how to tell you this, but we destroyed the bed.
We owe you a bed.
And she was rightfully pretty mad. And then Mark got on the phone and he said, he's from China, and he said, in China we have a saying that disasters are opportunities, and so that has stuck with me. I use that.
That's a good one.
That's my main mantra. But he said that to me, and then he said, we were going to put that into a house that we're working on right now, and we actually need 5 pieces of furniture. So why don't you we know you can't pay for it. At the time we had 0. So why don't you make us 5 pieces of furniture instead? And we were like, oh, that's awesome, because now we have these like original pieces in a really beautiful house that they designed. So
and did they say you have carte blanche to do whatever you want? There are 5 pieces. One has to be a bed, a side table. Just go. Imagine it.
They wanted a desk. They wanted a coffee table. I don't remember all of them actually. There were a few things. And then, we came up with them, they approved them, and then we built them. So that was wild. And that's kind of how we started.
And then you were like, we're the HAAS Brothers. Like that was the moment that you...
I had wanted to make it some like fancier name, or like we're German. I wanted to incorporate German into it. Nikki was like, no, people aren't going to want to read that. Or like, they won't care about that at all. Like HAAS Brothers is relatable. And I was like, okay, cool. We even took twins out because it's like less... Right,
because there's like the Verhoeven twins, and like there's already, but
and so
probably smart.
I mean, he's good at like bringing me down from I like want erudite kind of sounding things. I love.
Brothers is also like elusive, so you don't know if you're twins.
Yeah,
and I'm sure people probably often assume that you're not, right? Yeah, because you're so different.
Yeah, they usually don't. So, that was a wild start. And we rented this. Am I rambling too much?
No.
We rented a studio in downtown, and we had to then pay for it. We didn't have other jobs. We rented it to do that job. And so then we just started like hustling our way around and asking everybody if they needed something made. So for a while we were kind of the go-to people for fabricating something that other people wouldn't fabricate. Because
hold on, did this furniture look like some of the furniture you're doing now?
No, okay. It was still a little odd, but it's much more architectural looking. It's like you wouldn't be surprised to see it at like I don't know, not Crate and Barrel, but a more modern looking place, like maybe CB2 or something like that.
Okay, so it didn't look like an animal covered in fur with some hair.
No, not at all.
I love that stuff.
It was still slightly experimental with material application, but that's sort of it.
And you guys do a lot of material experimentation. So it's only been 10 years.
That is amazing.
And you guys are, at the top of the art market. What do you think it is that kind of spiraled you guys into this like the Haas Brothers, you're on every radar, you're in art news, you're in Basel, you're getting shows. Like, what do you think the key to that was?
I think it was our willingness to really take on any project in the beginning, and to not sleep, and to spend, I don't know, 5 years hardly able to eat. You know, it was like, for 5 years, it was a real slog. Now it's great. So that was on our part. That's what it took. And then circumstantially, a lot of things were to our advantage. I mean, I think it's good PR to be twins. We had connections. Our first jobs came from our older brother, so that's definitely helped. But then we just happened to meet Victoria Brenner, and I have to give her a lot of credit because she became our manager and introduced us to kind of our entire network of people that we know now.
So for anyone that doesn't know, Victoria Brenner is an art consultant and also the daughter of Yul Brenner.
Yeah.
And had success already in the art world. So how did you meet her?
We met her through our friends John and Iz, and she was representing them as like musicians and filmmakers. So she can kind of do she can do all sorts of stuff, but she was at that time managing kind of up and coming people in LA and in all of the arts. And so we met her through those two. And then she brought us on, and she introduced us to a bunch of people in New York. She took us there and had us walk around to meeting a lot of people we had never heard of. One of them was Pierre Rougier, who is the head of PR consulting. And I showed him a bunch of sample materials that we'd made, and he said, I have a client who will like this one. And it was this gold sort of hexagonal tile material. And it turned out to be Donatella Versace. So that was the real thing. The actual spark that I think blew everything up was Victoria introduced us to Pierre, who introduced us to Donatella, who again took a major leap of faith on us, having done zero, and just liked our enthusiasm, I think. And she said, make me a piece of furniture for my house, and it turned into a full collection for Versace Home, and a print for the women's wear. I think it was 2013 fall winter, maybe 12. So that was
that
insane.
Like puts you on the radar. I mean, then you just start to blow up, and you have gone on to like do a whole series of collaborations with really cool people.
Yeah.
We're looking at up over here behind me the book stand that you just created for Rihanna's new book. I think it's a sculpture in solid marble. I know you did a couple of different editions. So could you just talk about how that came about and what that was like?
That came through our gallery, Marianne Boski, and she and Keith Fox, who's from Fiden, were talking about it. I wasn't allowed to know who it was for a little while. They were gauging our interest, and then I found it out. I've never had so many NDAs, and that makes a lot of sense. But
right.
So for a while I was in the dark about it, but we were like told we would maybe work with a pop star, and we were like, oh, that sounds fun. And I love Fiden anyway, so I thought it would be exciting. I love books, so it was like great. And I don't know, it just started rolling. I guess they presented us to her, and she liked our stuff. And then she came to our studio, and we brainstormed and came up with 3 different things, and spent a year like making it happen. It was crazy.
I bet.
How do you feel about this marriage between celebrity or brand names and art? Kind of bring it back to the commercialism of what art is. What does that mean to you? Is there any time when you want to roll your eyes about like, oh, is it only important if so-and-so likes it?
Right. I totally get that. And I think having gone to art school, I used to like sort of turn up my nose at that kind of stuff, or any pop anything. Like I'm deep in my heart a fan of Britney Spears, but I didn't really let myself show that when I was at school. I would listen to Animal Collective and stuff. I like them too, but I was like, I'm going to go more esoteric.
Right.
And so I think it was natural for me and Nikki to like pop stuff anyway. And then I realized, art has all these restrictions placed on it by other people, and I don't know who they are. And if I follow the same restrictions, I'm not going to get anywhere, or I won't be satisfied. And I had looked at people like Keith Haring, who had a pop shop. Like he's amazing, and he did whatever he wanted to, and his life just seems more fun than an artist who is going to be a curmudgeon about stuff or be so purist that they would turn a project with Rihanna down. Like, no thanks.
Right.
So
you embrace the pop part of it.
Yeah, I think it's amazing, and you can talk to more people. Also, we grew up like very much. We grew up in Austin, but sort of half of our childhood was in Hollywood, around a lot of people, around a lot of famous people, and so we were kind of steeped in it. And I didn't ever see it as a negative thing. I think it's kind of awesome. And if you have that opportunity, why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But you guys really push the boundaries of, getting people to react. I mean, so many of your shows have pieces that have sexual innuendos or funny names. And I think you're right. I mean, I think people love it because they're like, oh my God, I can't believe these guys are doing this, and that somebody's showing it and we're not afraid. So have you had a lot of backlash about that, or people tend to love it?
People like it. I think there was a lot of backlash early on. These ceramics, for example, I remember somebody writing about them saying how hideous they are. And I was okay with it. I just kept going for it. They later wrote another article where they kind of retracted that opinion, which I thought was cool. But most of our backlash was because we were showing in design fairs a lot, and we would get complaints from other galleries saying that our stuff's not design. So that was there was about a 4-year struggle of which art design fair do we belong in, because at the time that people were trying to push us out of Design Miami,
which again, sorry, just going to reference it mainly shows furniture, decorative and functional objects versus being in the convention center where it's considered to be fine art and the blue chip pieces.
Exactly. So I don't think that this was before we entered any of these markets, we didn't understand that you aren't allowed to do certain things. I knew that I studied about in painting that there used to be a hierarchy between a history painting is more valuable than a still life. And a landscape falls somewhere else. Like certain things are less important just by nature of what they are. And that was annoying to me. So when we entered the design market and saw that there was pushback if we made something less functional, we got annoyed by it and kind of wanted to push that.
Disrupt?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think we were
disruptors.
I think we were disruptive for sure. I think we I don't know, we didn't like being told we couldn't do something. And there was one time where we made a collection in South Africa that the livelihood of a lot of people depended on us being able to show and sell the work. Is
that the beaded?
Yeah,
work?
There were 20 women in Cape Town who had produced the work, and it's a profit share. So it showing and selling was really important to them and to us. And we presented it at Design Miami, and we very nearly got banned from the fair.
Because you didn't make the work yourself?
Because it wasn't functional. And so we had to apply functional names to the pieces. Okay, and at the same time, Art Basel wasn't letting us in. So
you're in the gray.
Right, and Design Miami has always embraced us, and actually Rodman Premack, the head of Design Miami for a long time, was so supportive and always made sure we wouldn't actually wind up getting kicked out, but he had to deal with a lot of stuff on our behalf. It ended up that those objects were allowed to show. They sold out before the fair even opened, and then they were in the Cooper Hewitt design triennial, so they were great. I was very happy with those pieces, but the bureaucracy involved is really strange, and it's something that we I think that turned us on to being creative inside of business and bureaucracy also. How do you circumvent things? At Design Miami, what we did is we made a big mushroom that's made out of beads and bronze, and we said it's an indoor umbrella, and that made it allowed to be inside.
Dr. Seuss.
Yeah, you say it's an umbrella, and they're like, "Oh, okay, that's design," so it stays. And these sculptures, we said they're therapeutic toys, and they're like, "Oh, okay, that's a design too, so it can stay." And we called those vases. They look like vases too, but you can't use them. We make a lot of stuff you can't use that looks like furniture. So.
Well, that is my next question. How much of your furniture that looks like a chair do you hope someone uses like a chair? Any of it?
Yeah, all of it. If it looks like a chair, then go for it. If it looks like a vase, maybe not. If it's made out of ceramic, you can't use it.
Got it.
But unless it's fragile, I do like people to touch our work. So even if it's a sculpture, it's totally great to touch. All of our stuff is very tactile, and I like when people want to interact with it.
But you're represented in 2019. You are represented at multiple galleries.
Yeah,
Marianne Boesky from New York for non-functional objects, fine art
she shows
objects.
Functional sometimes too, but mostly non-functional.
And then R & Company for your work that is functional.
Yeah, exactly.
I think there's a lot of controversy and a lot of talk at all of the museums right now. Like, what is decorative? Ruth Ozawa was purchased through the decorative arts department last year at LACMA's collectors committee. But isn't she also a contemporary? Wouldn't she also belong contemporary? I think it's a pretty common question, a very fine line. What is something that what's fine art, what's decorative, and how do you draw the line? So it must have been interesting for you guys to kind of sit down and go, okay, how do we have dual representation and make it make sense?
Yeah, exactly. And for us, it was just kind of a waiting game, and then also continuing to make things where people aren't quite sure how to categorize it. And I think we talked a lot publicly about why is there this, who's actually deciding what's what? And I get it that things need to be categorized. People, it's an instinct to categorize stuff, and you kind of need to put information into chunks in order to process it. I'm not bummed that that's happening. What I don't like is when people enforce their own idea about that in a way that will stifle a career or somebody's creativity. So I battled against that, basically. And I think a lot of people deal with this. I can feel that the barrier has come down between art and design. I really don't think one is greater or lesser than the other. They come from the same place. In fact, design can have an emotional and impact and a visual beauty that art has, but you have to also make it do something. So that if you wanted to say one has more, maybe design. But that's what I'm saying is I don't think design is on a lower rung.
Well, I have a lot of opinions about that. But,
everybody does. It's
you can share them.
Well, no, because I think the decorative arts world gets snubbed quite a lot, and they're like, "This is decorative, and you can't be here." So I think you guys are such a good example of crossover. I mean, being able to be in both. When you're in Miami, you're in Design Miami one day, and the next day they open the convention center, and you're there. And I think that a lot of artists struggle with it, and you guys have set the example for, successfully crossing between the two. So I think that's amazing. But I want to go back to what you talked about a little earlier too. You guys were lucky enough to have some incredible mentorial relationships in your life, and you got a lot of opportunities. And I think that one of the things that makes your studio so unique is that you have different areas of the studio where you're creating different pieces. One could be working on accretions or doing the upholstery work, and that those people are working in your studio are artists, and you guys kind of give back to that process. And can you talk about like how you bring them in and how you encourage them to kind of be individual artists as well?
Oh, definitely. Everyone who works for us now kind of just came out of nowhere, sort of by word of mouth. One person would work for us and they'd bring a friend on, or a lot of them had either didn't go to school or had just left school. And we kind of lucked out with who we wound up getting. They're all amazing. But as far as encouraging them to be artists on their own, we only have a 4-day work week, and we have the studios open to anyone who works with us to use it.
So on the 5th day, they can
fifth
go in?
day or over the weekend. So they have 4 days working for us, and then they have 3 days that they can make their own stuff in our studio, which is having a studio space is a hurdle when you're a young artist. So that's, I think, one part of it. The other is to listen to them if they have ideas, and actually use their ideas and talk to them about it. And then another is to not micromanage, because I think if you're breathing down someone's neck, whether it's like if you're a cook or if you're a driver or something, and it never helps anybody. So I don't do that to them. And we also try whenever we can to connect them to people, and like we encourage them to go out and sell their work or show their work to our clients when they're in our studio.
Pretty generous.
That is pretty generous.
I mean, people did that for us too, and I really don't think I don't know. I don't like when people get success and then want to hoard it. I think that's nasty. I really I won't be happy with myself at the end of the day if I am not, using my position to help other people out. And another thing we do is we profit share. So people have ownership of the work, and when it sells, they get a percentage of profit.
So when one of your HAAS Brothers pieces sells, everyone in the studio shares in the sale?
Yeah, so that we started after having worked in Cape Town, because
Wait, so talk about Cape Town. That's Afriques, right?
Yes.
The beaded work we were discussing earlier.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, that spawned another project, which is awesome. But we went to Cape Town to do a talk at this fair called Guild that our friend Trevin McGowan puts on. And while we were there, we walked into another fair called Design in Daba, and it was a craft fair. There is another example of craft is not design, is not art. But we went into the craft fair, and we happened across a booth. There's a nonprofit called Monkey Biz there that they give beads to women in townships, and the women can make work and bring it, and they'll sell it. So that's I was inspired by that. I think it was that kind of sparked a lot of things, to have a business model that's about women in areas that need it, creating stuff for themselves and selling it on their own. They're not necessarily employees. They're actually just independent businesswomen, which I thought was really cool. But we also understood that pay in South Africa is very unfair and strange, and race has a whole lot to do with it.
And gender.
Race and gender both have a lot to do with it. And, where they live in townships which are separated from the main city, and they are apartheid era establishments. The whole thing is tricky, and when I dive into it, I start to get upset. But we happened across this booth, talked to them, and we were like, wow, their pieces are, they take probably just as long as our pieces, and they're so beautiful. But I can buy this for $20, and nobody made money on. I mean, that's not enough money. So part of our desire to work with them was to create a platform for them and to also have a profit share so that they were the artists that they showed up in the museum.
They care. They have care. Like stake in it.
Yeah. And, and, you know, when I sell something, I get a chunk of money. It's not an hourly thing. So I wanted the same to go for them because they are the artists making the work. I don't like if somebody makes work and pays minimum wage and says, okay, you can't give your business card to somebody or never tell anyone you work for me. I mean, that's so gnarly. So that was our first run at that.
And then you go to Venice, right?
Yeah.
And you find, tell us the story of Venice.
Yeah. So
and
amazing.
How that, yeah, because what you're doing, just to preemptively say this, I think you hit the like women, empowering women moment even before the whole Me Too movement began with Afriques. And then you do it again preemptively, and you do it this time in a really cool way. I got an email from Sotheby's this morning, promoting Micro Freaks. Mm-hmm. So with that, we would love for you to kind of walk us through how that whole thing comes about.
Yeah. So when we were in Cape Town, I spent, I think, 6 months there. For 2 years, we were traveling there like all the time and working with them. And they were working on a specific project, but at the same time, they were teaching me how to bead. And with my process brain, I started getting obsessed with beads, and that became my next focus.
And the method?
Yeah, the method is crazy. I mentioned a leaf scaling. I wanted to make a scalable object, and I thought beads would be good at that because leaves are made of cells, and beads are units that can be put together like cells. So I thought, oh, that's a great process to pursue. So that's 6 years later, I'm here and I have that process. Along the way, I went to Venice and was talking about beads nonstop because for a while it's the only thing I would talk about. And I happened to meet this woman who had inherited a bead factory from her father, and she didn't want it because she was a painter, and the legacy was I don't know how, but somehow painful for her. She wasn't interested in keeping the beads. So I got to go buy and collect 15,000 kilos of beads that are dead stock Murano beads from between like 1800 and 1980. They're like uranium and made with cyanide and all kinds of materials you can't use now, but they make beautiful colors. And
is it dangerous though to use?
No, it's dangerous to make the bead, but once it's there, it's all good. So I have those beads. I now have a process. Enter Linda Resnick, who I met in Aspen and is a philanthropist herself. She is so focused on women having economic opportunity. I mean, she's a self-made woman. She's unbelievable. And she really, I think that's one of her biggest things. And she said, I saw what you did in South Africa. I had told her about my bead process, and I said, I don't know what to do with it. I can't figure out who is going to make this. And so a light bulb went off for her, and she said, why don't you come to Lost Hills, California, where I know that there is very little employment for women. And she has a pistachio operation there. She owns a lot of different farms. So she knew that men can get farm labor, but women have not that much to do in those towns. And so she invited us to kind of start a similar project to our Cape Town project there. And it was her idea to do Micro Freaks. She thought, because we were employing them to make artwork with us once in a while, but we can't keep, at this point, it's like 50 women around the world. We can't keep them all employed full time. So we thought, let's make a project together that does allow that. And that's what Micro Freaks are. And they're just little
and the
figurines.
Money goes back to
25% of it goes back to Lost Hills. It goes to them and also to Lost Hills community in general. So something she's done there actually is created new schools. She repaved all the roads, put sidewalks in, put streetlights in, brought a voting booth there.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's an unincorporated, really forgotten town, and she has completely fixed the infrastructure. She created a community center, which is where we do a lot of the work. And when she brought me out there, I was so inspired and so excited, and we kind of just dove into it. And that's been going on for now, I think, 2 years.
Yeah, it's a beautiful collection. I mean, the pictures, I haven't seen it in person
yet.
But
they're really cute.
Yeah, they are really cute. And the price point's lower, right?
Yeah. So most of our stuff is very hard to buy. I can't buy it myself. And I mean, I own a couple of things, but these ones are actually accessible. And that was another thing we wanted to do. I know there's a lot of people who want a sculpture of ours, but can't have it. And, Jeff Koons did that with the plate. There's a lot of people who've done this. And we were looking at Keith Haring again, thinking pop shop, that's cool. We've started selling like t-shirts and things. And that's our like accessible sculpture, basically.
So
can I ask a question about way earlier on?
Yeah.
Back to when you said you had to struggle for 5 years and it was rough for a little while. I think that's really interesting because you'd think, oh, he's in with this celebrity circle. He got so lucky. He gets to make this furniture, but it still is a slog for 5 years. So what happens then? Do you still have to have a side job, or are you totally committed to what you're doing and come hell or high water, you're just going to do that? You're going to take as much work as you can to just keep your focus on the creative thing instead of the other job. That's, I think so many of us make that mistake, or maybe it's not a mistake, maybe you have to do it, but meaning did you get pulled away by having to make the money at that time, or how did you deal with that time?
Yeah, I had to focus on both, and I think it's really difficult. That's why I mentioned not sleeping. Luckily when you're young you can do it, but I had the creative pursuit, which is what I wanted in the end, and I was still cooking, and I would do side jobs here and there. And the jobs we were taking on at first were like producing sets for music videos. Like, you would never know this, but we made the set for Neon Indian Polish Girl music video. We made all kinds. There's more. Oh, we made these this like virtual reality headset goggles for TV on the radio. A song called "Will Do," but you don't. It's like we did a lot of projects.
So you didn't get credit? There's
credit, but no one really realizes that we did any of that stuff. So all kinds of things. There's an Italian pop star named Gala. We made something for her. So a lot of stuff like that. But yeah, I was still cooking for the first few years. And then when HAAS Brothers took all of my time, I actually had to put away painting, which was a love of mine, and just focus on the HAAS Brothers. But we didn't make any money for the longest time. Like, we made sure to pay our employees, but then we were like, there's not much left at this point. But I think that's kind of what you have to do with any business to start. And we did know people, but that doesn't mean people were like giving us handouts with the money. Because it's, I think, harder to come by. We got investors at one point.
So what were they investing in? If they came and invested in, how does that work?
In our company. This is post Versace, so we were able to show a value. And at this point, our own company had also signed us on. And they were investing in us as a fine furniture company.
Our own company was, or your investors?
Our investors were. We had 4 investors. And that, thank God, because we were about to implode financially, and they stepped in and helped with that.
Then they take a piece of that company?
Yeah, they get profit, and it's like any company. I mean, it's a technically we're a corporation, so it operates like that. It's not public, but it has those kinds of rules.
And are they still invested in your company, and they get it?
We wound up purchasing our shares back, which I'm proud of. We couldn't have kept going without their investment, but we were really proud to purchase them back. And it gives us the freedom to do profit sharing and things like that without getting approval. So that's an important part of it. Because if you have investors, profit sharing isn't such an attractive proposition to them,
right?
Because they want the share.
Yeah.
in general, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. But it's just, I didn't know that you truly are constructed like a regular corporation. Mm-hmm. So here you are, this fine artist, mm-hmm. and you have created a corporation. You took investors. You have worked for other corporations like Versace, mm-hmm. and then you did buy your share. It's very typical corporate structure.
Yeah.
So you had to along the way, you figured out how to create a business around being a fine artist.
Yeah. And that is something that no one teaches you. Amazingly, art school does not teach the business of art, and it's very business related. I mean, there's the fairs are Design Miami, Art Basel. They're all essentially trade shows, and
glorified trade
shows. That
is
such a funny way, but it is true.
They're trade shows, and they're also kind of like a stock market floor in a way, because mm-hmm. art is an investment. You have that kind of business entering into it mm-hmm. also. So I think we just wound up through selling to people and meeting some incredible people, understanding the workings of it. And we had a trial by fire, and I think we decided to also be really good business people. And then, when you start doing things like profit sharing to South Africa, that there's a lot of legal stuff involved there. It's hard to send money there. Mm. It's going to a nonprofit, or a not-for-profit. I don't know what it is, but it's not easy. So you have to bring in lots of lawyers, have tons of structure, and it's something that I've started to really enjoy doing. Mm. And I think the two of us actually I think we pride ourselves on being pretty good business people also.
But should you think of it in a business mind in that way too? Like, do you think about, how much revenue are we going to make this year? Does it become part of the thought process in a really concrete way?
So we will decide not to make some things occasionally if the cost to make it is going to make it so that we can't keep our employees on the track that they're running on. And there are very few occasions where we focus, where profit is the first focus. Because that starts to interfere with the artwork.
Mm-hmm. But does the gallery push you to go in one, make more of the accretions or what's selling? Do you follow advice from them?
No, not so much. They do know what's being responded to by the market, and they have, but really they're there to support a creative vision, and they do make a business out of it on their own. But a good gallery won't interfere with the artist by giving them, dangling a money carrot in front of an artist and telling them to do something isn't actually going to work in the end. And I think gallerists know that. They respect that art is still art, even though it has a financial component to it. So they don't mess with it that way. The micro freaks were one occasion where an economic need drove the inception of the project, but that's because that economic need to us is an interesting one to tackle. It's not just for ourselves. So that's kind of where it came into the picture in that case.
It was like a benevolent human need, really. Is what
yeah, I mean, or just fair. I mean, I don't know.
Fair.
I think it's fair for somebody who makes something and it's called art to get paid like an artist. So it was something that we really wanted. And we knew that we couldn't go in and give hope to people by hiring them for certain projects and then just say, okay, see you later. Out. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's important for us to sustain them.
So in closing, mm-hmm. you guys have successfully turned your creativity into a sustainable operational business. What advice would you give to someone coming out of art school or someone that doesn't have formal training that wants to take their art and try to make it profitable or get a gallery?
Show it to everybody. Don't let fear prevent you from talking to people that you should talk to or that you think you maybe should talk to. And also don't think that business or opinions have any bearing on what you should be making.
Well said.
That was great.
Thanks.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Simon,
Thank
for
you.
coming in and sharing your story and your success.
That was so good.
Oh, thanks.
I kept hearing more and more about everything and how it all came together.
Yeah, I had fun.